With the launch of the Witch Queen DLC came a complete overhaul to the way the Void subclasses in Destiny operate. Players now have much more customizability and can mix and match various abilities and grenades and supers that were once locked within a very specific subclass tree, prior to the update. Along with those changes came a new artifact for the season that completely it's stacked with armor mods meant to interact with the Void abilities and weapons and enhance them even further. So in light of these changes, both PvE and PvP activities have seen Void subclasses rise to the top of the meta and grow in popularity. Quite honestly, I absolutely love my Void 3.0 build for my Voidwalker in PvE, and it kicks some serious butt in just about every activity, including raids, nightfalls, legendary lost sectors, and more. But when it comes to PvP, I'm personally having a really hard time diving into the Void 3.0 builds, and I'm defaulting back to maining solar subclasses literally on all three of my characters, my Titan, my Warlock, and my Hunter. And I have a perfectly reasonable argument for each of these characters and why Void 3.0 just isn't for me in PvP. And that's what I wanted to chat about in this video, starting with the Voidwalker, then the Hunter, and then the Titan. If you just want to hear my thoughts on one of those, the one that's most relevant to you, I'll be sure to include timestamps so you can skip ahead to whichever character you want to hear me unpack. Most people know by now that I play all subclasses in Destiny regularly, but my Warlock has a lot more playtime in the grand scheme of things than my other two characters. If I had to select my main class, Warlock would be it. And on my Warlock, I've logged a lot more time as a Voidwalker than any of the other three subclasses. I've always been a big fan of how the Devour perk synergizes with extremely aggressive play, and that suits me very, very well. But I had high expectations for Voidwalker 3.0, but I find myself pretty disappointed in the execution in PvP, so let me break it down. When I talk about all three Void subclasses today, I'm going to talk about them in two different ways. I'm going to talk about their power fantasy, right? What their whole vibe is, what they're supposed to be leaning into, and this part of their identity is really about personal preference. Do you personally vibe with that identity, with that power fantasy? The other thing I'm going to talk about is the relative strength of these subclasses in practice. So for Voidwalker, I love their power fantasy, that side of the conversation. I love this idea of being a leeching vampiric force on the field. Your whole thing is about siphoning strength and health and applying draining effects on opponents. And I think that's really, really cool. And that reaches back to the power fantasy that they had in mind for the Voidwalker back in Destiny 1 even. So for me, very appealing subclass. It's the application of that power fantasy that turns me off from Voidwalker now. So I believe that Voidwalker is by a landslide the weakest of the three Void subclasses compared to Nightstalkers and Sentinels in PvP. The Pocket Singularity, the new melee ability, it travels the shortest distance of all ranged melee attacks. It also travels very slowly, which leads to a lot of trades. It's rarely more useful than a standard melee. It's supposed to have this knockback effect, and sometimes it does that and it's cool and it helps you if you happen to be reloading when you got pushed by an enemy, but it's rarely going to change the outcome of an encounter because of its short range and slow travel time. The Child of the Old Gods isn't overly useful either. I mean, every now and then it's going to stick around and someone who's low health is just going to happen to pass through its radius. But for the most part, enemies are rarely letting you do all of the setup required to get Child of the Old Gods going. They're not going to let you toss down a rift unopposed, peek out and shoot them, and then allow the orb to travel all the way over to them, stop nearby, and then start siphoning them very, very slowly. It's just way too many steps for Destiny PvP, where most encounters are over long before that, right? If a Warlock tries to do this to me, I literally just leave, right? I'll be like, okay, I guess I'm going to leave this lane, I'll find a different approach. Or I'll just turn and shoot the Child of the Old Gods orb and destroy it with ease and just take it off the field very, very quickly. On top of all that, Voidwalkers literally got nerfed when Bungie took away their ability to activate Devour on command by sacrificing their grenade charge to start the Devour timer. At first, I was willing to roll with this, but after several weeks, I can feel the effects of that change, and it feels really bad. In order to get that Devour on command now, you have to specifically use a particular exotic armor piece, the Secant Filaments, that takes the Rift charge in exchange for Devour. That means if you want to be able to do what Voidwalkers have been able to do since launch in Destiny 2, now you have to forego the Transversive Steps, the Ophidian Aspects, the Astrocyte Verse, any other exotics that you would want to use. You have to sacrifice those in order to do this thing you've always been able to do. And on top of that, you have to have bought the Witch Queen DLC in order to have access to this new exotic. So in summation, Voidwalker is really appealing to me when you consider its whole vibe, its whole power fantasy, as being this vampiric force on the field. But in application, it feels weak with too many trade-offs in order to fully take advantage of those new abilities and the old ones too. When compared apples to apples in PvP, Top Tree Dawnblade has so much more consistent utility and application than Voidwalker, even after the complete rework to Void. And so I remain a Solar Warlock for now most of the time. Moving on to the Hunter. This one is literally the exact opposite for me. Okay, the Nightstalker has a ton of strength and utility in the new PvP sandbox. They are powerful, and they can lean into their power fantasy every second of the match using invisibility in a myriad of ways, tricking opponents with radar pings, and vanishing into a cloud of smoke. They feel like genuine stealth rangers on the prowl, and that's awesome, right? And I'm not here to talk about balance today. I'm just going to talk about these things like the power fantasy and the strength of their application. I think this is really cool. And while I can appreciate the strength and the application of that power fantasy, and I can genuinely be happy for those who really vibe with it, I personally don't, right? I don't really get down with stealth approaches. I never have. Any RPG that I play, the stealth and the rogue classes, those are the last ones that I try. It's just not my thing. So while I really think they nailed the power fantasy of this one and translated a vision for the subclass into an exceptional execution of that vision in PvP, I just personally don't vibe with it. So I'll stick to the playstyles that I do like. So for me, the Hunter feels the most rewarding when I'm feeling like a gadget user. You know, I like the trip mines, the throwing knives, and feeling like I'm Batman, you know, with a tool belt full of cool equipment that I can leverage quickly in real time. And that's why I love the Gunslinger, and I will continue to main it on my Hunter for the time being. I'm very excited for when the Solar subclasses get the Void treatment down the road. And finally, the Titan talk. This one's really interesting to me. It's interesting because it actually hits the mark in both areas for me with one small caveat, right? When I consider the whole power fantasy and the core identity of the Sentinel, I really dig it. The idea is that you're a defender, you know, you're the shield, the bastion, the castle that your enemies have to scale if they want to overcome you, and I think that's super cool. This is totally reflected in their kit, and props to Bungie for nailing this one. The Titan has, you know, ways of giving themselves and their teammates extra shields. They can throw down physical shields in a number of ways too. They really did nail the Sentinel's whole vibe. I can totally respect that. So regardless of whether or not you think it's annoying to play against or if you think it's overpowered, you do have to give credit where it's due. The Void Titan is a stronghold. And in terms of how powerful this approach is in PvP, I mean, it's great. Void Titans are very popular right now. After these changes, they're very strong. And it forces opponents to try to be more clever with uprooting a Titan who's dug in and grounded in a defensive position. They can be a real chore to deal with. So I like the power fantasy, unlike the Hunter, and I like the powerful application of it, unlike the Warlock. The one caveat, though, is that I'm not wired as a player to play like that. I just can't do it. I like the whole approach, but I'm very impatient. It just doesn't suit me as a player to play a defender in Destiny. I get antsy. I get impatient. I have to be mobile. I have to run around the whole map and seek out engagements everywhere, right? The Void Titan is strongest when you use them to hold a powerful position. They're best used as a means of locking down a lane or a flag or a position of power on the map, so enemies have to deal with you in order to continue racking up points. And I think that's awesome, but it just isn't me. When I compare that to the way that I like to play Titan, it's totally different. My favorite way to play Titan is to play Code of the Siegebreaker. I mean, by its very name, it's the exact opposite. The Sentinel is about holding your position. The Siegebreaker is about breaking into a new one. So I love to ramp up my Sun Warrior buff and start this whole cadence where I get a kill, and then I advance forward and step into the sunspot that I just created. This sunspot, it charges up my abilities, it gets me ready to go for the next encounter, and it ramps up my weapon damage for a short time, so I can take on another opponent and then advance again to the new sunspot. And I chain these over and over and over, just constantly advancing and applying pressure and breaking into new locations, not rooting myself in one. So there you have it. These are my reasons for not playing Void 3.0. I can't even speak. These are my reasons for not playing Void 3.0 in PvP. And this isn't a criticism really of anything related to Void 3.0. Why can't I say that word? Void 3.0. Like, say that 10 times fast. Is it just me? Is it just me being unable to speak today? It might just be me. But anyways, this isn't a criticism of anything related to Void 3.0 other than Voidwalker maybe. I think that Hunters and Titans, Bungie set a clear identity for these classes, and they really nailed it in the execution of that vision. Warlocks could use a little tuning, but they could eventually get there, I'm sure. Overall, these changes are exceptional, but they just aren't my thing right now. And I have a feeling that when the solar changes come, I think I'm going to be a really happy man, because like I said, I main these solar subclasses. Until then, we keep experimenting, we keep grinding. Thanks so much for listening to me break these subclasses down from my perspective. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Feel free to drop a like on the video, only if you enjoyed it. And stop by my live gaming show with M. Tashed and Cactus HD sometime on Wednesday nights. It's called Real Gamer Hour here on YouTube. We stream our live show at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesdays, and then we upload the episode everywhere podcasts are found. We talk about all things gaming, get you caught up for the gaming news for the week, and even any community drama that may have gone down. Hey, we can talk about that too. So we would love to see you. Check the pinned comment for a link to the RGH channel. Be warm and well fed, my friends, and I hope to catch you in the Crucible.